Hello, my friends, and welcome to Baldur's Gate 3 Patch 8. That's right, I'm so excited because after months of stress testing, Patch 8 is finally here. We can all play with it with the new subclasses, with console and PC and Mac crossplay, with the new photo mode. Tons and tons of features have been added. So what we're going to do today is go over all of the patch notes, take a look at anything that's changed from the stress test, and just talk about any of the features that really jump out at me as being really exciting for Patch 8, and things that we will change when it comes to building characters in the future. Before I start, though, I do want to take a second to say it's just so cool that Larian produced this much content as a free update years after the launch of Baldur's Gate 3. Pretty much any other developer would have released this as a $30 or $40 DLC, so it's just amazing that we're getting this for free, and I don't want to lose sight of that, even if there's some things about the patch that I might criticize. It's just so awesome that we are getting such an amazing update well after the game launched. They didn't have to do this. Very cool that they did. All right, let's jump into the patch notes. So I'm just going to be sort of skimming down the patch notes, and we're going to talk about stuff that jumps out at me, either as having changed significantly since the stress test, or just major features that you might not know about if you weren't following the patch during the beta. Oh, the menu's going to follow us down the page. Let's fix that. That's going to be really annoying when it overlays everything. All right, that should fix it. So they've got this summary at the top. This is mostly saying that this is the last patch, like we just talked about. So we can skip past this because there's no major new content in it. But let's jump right in and start talking about the major features of Patch 8. So firstly, they've got Steam trading cards. I think that's pretty cool. It was very surprising. I actually hadn't noticed that Baldur's Gate 3 didn't have Steam trading cards because it's not something that I personally spend a lot of time doing on Steam. But it is cool that they've added them for the people who really like to complete those collections. Yet another way to show off how much time you've spent playing this game. And just a nice, cool feature that they were able to add. I think that most games should have these because these are just a neat thing that a lot of people enjoy. Console crossplay. That is probably the biggest feature of this patch in terms of allowing people to experience the game. This is going to let you play with your friends who don't have PCs if you're on PC, or your friends who are on PC if you are on console, and it's going to enable a huge number of people to play co-op in Baldur's Gate 3 who weren't able to before, which I think is just awesome. The fact that it also is going to support modded play is just incredible, because most games that have crossplay functionality do not support mods across the different platforms. Baldur's Gate supporting mods on consoles at all is already very unusual, and I think kind of incredible. There are very few games that allow console players to mod their games at all. So the fact that Larian does is really neat, and really enables people who wouldn't otherwise get to experience customizing their game to do that. I think that's just a very cool thing, and the fact that you can then do it with your friends is even cooler. So, huge update in terms of allowing you to play with your friends, which I think is just awesome. As we continue to scroll down, there's a section on how to use crossplay, which, of course, you'll want to read if you want to use crossplay, but we can safely skip it for the patch note review. Next up, as in terms of major features, they've added photo mode. Photo mode lets you remove the UI and create all kinds of cool artworks, and they've thrown in a bunch of examples here, which really showcase just how cool the photo mode can get. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 is a beautiful game. The graphics in this game are really quite excellent, especially for an isometric top-down game. So it is really nice that we can use photo mode to create really cool screenshots and moments. I'm going to scroll past all of the content here, although there are some pretty cool ones. Finding your screenshots, and then of course the content that I personally am the most excited for, the new subclasses. They've added 12 new subclasses, one for each of the existing classes, and I've done more detailed reviews of these new subclasses in previous videos, but let's walk through each of the 12 new subclasses, talk about kind of what build you should be thinking of for them, and what types of characters they support, to give you a quick idea of how to jump in for Patch 8. The Path of Giants Barbarian is a damage-focused barbarian subclass, which lets you get huge when you rage and turn any weapon into a throwing weapon. So your character can hurl a hammer at enemies and have it come back to them. It lets you do massive damage when throwing weapons, so it's going to be a great addition to throwing weapon builds. College of Glamour Bard is a support-focused bard that lets you give temporary hit points to allies, and then when those allies get hit, enemies get charmed and become unable to attack them again. Also, once per day, it lets you cast Command as a bonus action for 10 turns, each turn for 10 turns, just locking down enemies, and if those enemies are charmed, they get commanded without a saving throw. So Glamour Bard is an excellent support character that will fulfill a role in parties that need a character that provides support and healing, but not if you need damage. Death Domain Cleric, on the other hand, is the damage-focused cleric. You get a huge amount of burst damage in melee, you get to double up on your damage cantrips, and so this adds a lot of early game damage, especially to Cleric, which is kind of the only weakness of Cleric, is low early game damage. So Death Domain Cleric is going to be one of the strongest early game characters, and provides you a huge amount of ability to do burst damage throughout the game, which is something that Cleric is mostly missing. So it's an awesome addition to Cleric if you want a more damaging focused Cleric. Circle of the Stars Druid is a kind of all-rounder druid. It gives you 3 possible forms, one of which lets you heal, one of which lets you deal ranged damage as a bonus action, and one of which lets you deal AoE damage as a bonus action in shorter range, with assorted passives. It also has a bunch of other abilities, but basically Circle of the Stars Druid is kind of Druid, but more so. So if you just like the gameplay of Druid, Circle of the Stars Druid gives you a lot of awesome options for Druid, and will just kind of enhance your Druid playthrough. Arcane Archer Fighter, well, it's right in the name here. Arcane Archers imbue their arrows with magical effects. You can think of this as very similar to a Battlemaster Fighter, where you can expend a resource to have an attack do a bonus effect. But for the Arcane Archer, it's only going to be for ranged attacks, but the effects tend to be much more impactful. For example, Banishing Arrow lets you effectively cast Banishment, the 4th level spell, to just remove an enemy from combat for 2 turns when you hit them with an arrow, which is an amazing ability to get at level 3. So Arcane Archer Fighter lets you do great damage like any archer, and also provide a lot of control. Drunken Master Monk is a mobile, sort of striker-focused monk with hit-and-run gameplay. It lets you use, as your special monk flurry, a disengage at the same time, so you can hit enemies and then run away without taking retaliation strikes. You can stack up your armor class, by getting enemies drunk, and also retaliate against enemies who miss you with attacks. Now, I criticized this class a lot during the stress test, because I think that the abilities didn't quite work out the way that I was hoping for them to. We will do some testing to see if it has seen any adjustment, as soon as I'm done reviewing the patch notes. Oath of the Crown Paladin is a tanking and defensively focused paladin that also gets access to Spirit Guardians, which is an amazing ability for a paladin to have. So you can buff your allies' chances to hit, you can tank damage for your allies by redirecting damage from your ally to you, and you can also be one of the best Radiating Orb characters in the game, running around surrounded in magical light, hitting enemies with radiant damage from your smites, and getting them with radiant damage from your Spirit Guardian, so you're constantly stacking up Radiating Orbs. Oath of the Crown Paladin is going to be a new mainstay for 1 level, for characters that are taking 2 levels of Paladin to get access to Smite, because the level 1 ability gives you a hit chance bonus, which is amazing. And overall, it is just an incredible paladin for supporting, tanking, and dealing damage. Great frontliner for any party to have. Swarmkeeper Ranger lets you choose one of 3 swarms, each of which lets you then choose one of 3 abilities every single turn when you attack. So once per turn, you get to activate one of these 3 abilities. You can add extra damage to your attack, you can teleport a short distance, or you can debuff an enemy based on which swarm you take, whether that's moths to blind them, or bees to knock them backwards, or lightning jellyfish lightning ability to shock them and preventing them from taking reactions. Those are really powerful abilities, and they get upgraded at level 11, so these give you a neat debuff that you can add to every attack. Usually you're going to build this as an archery character that's passing out debuffs to enemies passively, while also doing amazing damage. Swashbuckler Rogue gets special bonus actions, including the ability to disarm an enemy and make a full main hand weapon attack. So it kind of is a rogue that gets extra attack, and just has a lot of special bonus actions that it can do, blinding enemies, running around. You get a bonus to initiative. You can sneak attack enemies regardless of whether you have a nearby ally. So it gives you a lot of option to play a hit and run style rogue and pick off enemies who are on their own by acting first, sneak attacking them to death, and then running away, by blinding and disarming them. So it's a more tricky play style than a lot of other characters. Shadow Magic Sorcerer is a darkness-focused sorcerer with the Warlock's ability to see in darkness. Darkness in Baldur's Gate 3 is incredibly powerful, making you effectively immune to enemy ranged attacks, giving you advantage on all your attacks and enemies disadvantage on all theirs if you have a way to see through it. So, sorcerers would often take 2 or 3 levels of Warlock to get access to darkness abilities and, of course, other Warlock effects. So Shadow Magic Sorcerer gets to do that while remaining a full sorcerer, getting you access to darkness abuse and some of the most powerful things in the game, while being a full sorcerer, also one of the most powerful things in the game. You also get to summon Nimbus, a very good dog, who can split into more very good dogs when taking damage, so that gives you a pretty powerful ability to help tank for you and provide sorcery point restoration through triggering Nimbus's omens. Very cool ability that gives you a lot of options in the mid-game, especially. Hexblade Warlock is the melee-focused Warlock subclass, getting essentially the same ability as Pact of the Blade to attack using your charisma, but at level 1, meaning that Hexblade Warlocks can tie everything that they do to a single attribute right from the beginning of the game. They also get to do extra damage on all of their attacks equal to their proficiency bonus with Hexblade's Curse, so you can multiclass them with things like Magic Missile or Scorching Ray for truly absurd damage. And Hexblade Warlock also gets to summon allies for free, defend themselves with reactions. This is the most powerful of the 12 new subclasses, so if you're looking for just raw power level, Hexblade Warlock is the place to start. And finally, Blade Singing Wizard is a melee-focused wizard subclass with a homebrewed ability that lets you add to your armor class and movement speed when you're using a sword, and then when you attack or cast spells, charge up a so-called Blade Song Climax, which is a very funny name, which you can then detonate for damage and healing to your whole party. So very cool character that gets stronger as fights go long, and of course is just a wizard that gets to also attack with a sword, which is a power fantasy that many people enjoy. Continuing to scroll down, they also mention here a number of changes to how modding works and improvements to the modding toolkit, which is awesome. Any changes and improvements to the ability of mod makers to make mods is awesome for the entire community, whether or not you use mods. Obviously, if you use them, the ability for mod makers to make more mods more easily is great for you. But even if you don't, a robust modding scene is what keeps a game like this alive in the long term and keeps people coming back to it for years to come. And Larian understands that, so they have been amazing at supporting mod makers and have continued to add more ways to do that. They've also included a commitment to continue curating mods for console, so that means that console players are still going to get updated mods and new mods being added as they're approved, which again is amazing. This is well beyond how the mod scene works for most developers and most games. So I would just want to reiterate how unusual and how awesome it is that they're committing to continuing to pass mods onto console players and make sure that everyone gets to play with all of the great updates that you can get from modded games. So that's all the main highlights, but let's dive into the details and see what's changed by getting into the meat of this update, the patch notes. Just scrolling down a little bit here. All right, we've got patch notes. So obviously there's going to be a lot of bug fixes, but we're going to mostly focus on gameplay changes and balance changes because I want to look at what character building and parties and different things and different opportunities that we have to build characters differently will be in the future. So let's jump right in with gameplay updates. Gameplay. Fixed containers inside inventories. So that's just a bug fix. Another bug fix. Wild-shaped panther not being able to prowl. This is the stealth ability of the panther wild shape. Is actually really nice. Now you can become invisible in panther wild shape, which is very good. Gives druids a whole dimension to their gameplay, so that's a pretty big deal. When you succeed a perception check, the spotted item will now ping on the minimap. I love this change, by the way. There's so many times when I first started playing this game where I would succeed on a perception check for like a little switch or a trap or something and then just not be able to find it because it's a 3D game, so you have to scroll around to find the highlighted item. I'm going to be scrolling through these and picking up and just talking about things that kind of jump out at me as I scroll through them. So we're not going to go through every single patch note because there's about 1 billion of them. Fixed free cast being reset when any condition is applied. That's pretty important. That is a bug fix. I believe this didn't work on honor mode, though I haven't tried it recently myself. But this would let you just cast spells for free forever, which obviously fixing that bug is pretty useful for avoiding the game being broken. Oh, this also is really great. Neutral and friendly NPCs no longer become hostile when they walk into surfaces. That's really nice, actually. That's a huge quality of life update. That could brick honor mode runs sometimes if you left a surface by accident. The moving platform bug being fixed is another incredible bug fix that's going to make honor mode runs so much less dangerous. This was an infamous run killer for just a bug that completely obliterated honor mode runs when your whole party fell to their deaths, and also characters getting stuck on ladders. These two fixes are probably the most impactful bug fixes possible in Baldur's Gate 3, because ladders could soft lock your runs and the Gauntlet of Shar could just kill your run. In fact, a lot of players just avoided the moving platforms in the Gauntlet entirely for honor mode. So these are really, really nice fixes. Fixed war magic being active before extra attack, forcing the player to use a bonus action before getting access to other extra attacks. That's a nice fix as well. It's going to make Eldritch Knights not consume their bonus actions by accident, which was definitely a real problem. And then similarly, yeah, they use free extra attacks before their war magic attack. Fixed Valiant damage not triggering properly, so this is the Valor Bard, and would sometimes fail to give you the extra damage, and this is a pretty nice update to make sure that that's consistent. Anything here that really jumps out at me? A lot of UI bugs, and of course UI bugs are very annoying, so a lot of fixes for this kind of thing is very important to make sure that everyone has the best experience possible. It's not going to change the way that you plan or build characters or runs, but this will just make your runs much smoother. Fixed an honor mode issue at High Hall where all party members would die. Oh yes, the domination bug. Another just run killer that they have fixed. I really like that all of these honor mode fixes are going into place because they would brick runs in ways that the player had no control over, so fixing those is really nice. And similarly, this one. Fixed body type 1 Dwergar incorrectly receiving halfling stats instead of dwarf stats. I did not know this was happening before this patch note released in the stress test, and this is very funny. So I'm glad that has been fixed. And then another couple things that have to do with honor mode runs or incorrect dialogue. So all great bug fixes. I like to see all of these, especially the ladder fix and the moving platforms fix. Those are going to be massive. There are also some updates to combat-related things. So a couple combats that were triggering that shouldn't. Neutral NPCs and with Ceres, you no longer get combats that just shouldn't happen but were happening. So that's pretty nice. Fixed a bug causing damage riders to be added multiple times in honor mode. Now, this is a little bit of a deceptive patch note. As far as I know, this is specific to an issue that cropped up in the stress test beta with Swarmkeeper Ranger, where the damage riders for that were being added many, many times, and does not fix every instance of damage rider bugs in honor mode. So I think that most ways to stack damage riders are still functioning in honor mode. We'll have to test, of course, if that's been adjusted further since the last stress test update. But things like the Rat Bat or the Lightning Jabber, I don't believe were fixed despite this patch note. And fixed sneak attack not activating for actions to spawn additional projectiles like curving shot or arrows of many targets. That's another really nice one. So a couple updates to things that will just make combat a little smoother. I'm going to quickly skim the next couple sections here because these are mostly bug fixes. So they've done a bunch of bug fixes to various modding and effects that were caused by having mod conflicts or third-party mods enabled. So these have been fixed, which is great. Again, more improvements to modding I'm always very happy with. Added more performance options, including for the Steam Deck. I haven't tried Baldur's Gate 3 on a Steam Deck. I assume that it doesn't run great, but anything that makes it smoother for people who want to do that, I think is excellent as well. And then scripting and flow, this is checks for achievements, checks for story events and everything. So there's a lot of and a lot of story events that weren't triggering correctly. This, of course, is going to be very spoiler heavy. Let me just quickly skim these patch notes and see if there's anything major that changed here. Reminded Minthara that knocked out does not mean dead, so she'll more reliably appear in Moonrise Towers. That's awesome. That was a very irritating bug where sometimes you would go through the whole effort of knocking Minthara out and then still wouldn't get her to appear on the sort of good aligned Minthara recruitment path, which is really nice. So hopefully that has fixed those issues and recruiting Minthara will now be much more reliable. You can no longer teleport out of Moonrise while controlling Minthara, and yeah, just a bunch of other fixes to recruiting Minthara. That's great. Really happy to see that. And a bunch of dialogue fixes as well, but the main one here, background goals that weren't triggering. So this is going to let you get more inspiration dice. There were definitely a lot of missing inspirations. So having more inspirations overall, especially if you're playing a background that was missing some, we will probably have to go through and test which ones are getting the ability to trigger more inspirations. So getting more inspiration dice is going to make your playthrough just more consistent because you'll have the ability to reroll dice more often, no matter what background you're using. So again, great bug fixes, all to things that were not significant issues, but issues that needed fixing, and especially the Minthara thing will be a big deal. Some animation and art fixes, but UI fixes are something I'm actually very excited by. Let's check if there's any of the things that really annoyed me that have been fixed, because there were a lot of UI fixes that needed to be done here. Fix some reaction tooltips like Divine Allegiance not showing some values correctly in the description. So this was showing the variable rather than the actual value in the description. I don't know if this will have been fixed in the level up screen because the Divine Allegiance tooltip is completely wrong in the level up screen, or was last time I tested, so we'll have to check that. Mentioned the damage Corrosive Spit does in its condition tooltip. Fix a bug where you'd have to deselect your current passive when respecking a character. Great. Tides of Chaos now correctly states it only works for ability checks. Okay, that's useful as well, of course, because this is basically guidance from the Wild Magic Sorcerer. So again, updated the Life Shrinker tooltip so to correctly state that it doesn't require Pact of the Blade, so you don't need Pact of the Blade to take Life Shrinker, though if you're using the melee-focused Warlock class feature at level 12, you probably are a Pact of the Blade Warlock anyways. This, again, removing variables, more tooltips showing up properly on the character sheet, Accolade of Nature, that's great. Fixed controller UI not accurately showing number of fixes to controller inputs, which is amazing. Obviously, anything that helps controller players who are already struggling with Baldur's Gate 3's UI is very helpful, of course, because trying to control a really complicated game like this on controller is pretty difficult. So anything that makes that easier, I'm very happy about. And fixed the generic icon for some passive features missing from their tooltips in the character sheet. That just adding more icons. Again, visual clarity is very, very important. But for the most part, I'm not seeing significant tooltip fixes in these patch notes. Now, they may not be mentioned, and we're going to have to do some testing. But mostly, this looks like fixes to sort of gameplay UI rather than like level up screen UI. So less relevant to me in the videos that I make, but more relevant to most players. So again, great fixes. I'm going to quickly skip over sound and cinematics, although there's a new spot where the Easter egg song plays, so keep an eye out for that, or an ear out for that, rather. Some fixes to writing, some fixes to multiplayer, and some crash fixes. I don't need to go over all of these individually, but these are all great fixes as well, so of course, happy to see those. But let's get into what we're really excited for, combat and balance. Now, obviously, combat and balance changes are the ones that are going to most affect how we build characters and plan parties in the future, so of course we want to dive into those in the most detail. The potent spellcasting passive now affects Burning Sinew and Toll the Dead. Bursting Sinew, excuse me. So this is the passive that Light Clerics and Knowledge Clerics, I believe, get, that lets them add their Wisdom to damage with cantrips. This wasn't working properly in the beta, and this is actually a pretty significant change, because adding your Wisdom to an AoE spell like Bursting Sinew is a not insignificant damage buff, and Toll the Dead is now Cleric's best damage cantrip. So both of those are going to be a pretty significant upgrade to Light and Knowledge Clerics. Light Cleric obviously didn't need the help, but Knowledge Cleric, can get a pretty big boost from this, and that's pretty nice. Fix the Owlbear's Rage condition, clearing when it's hit, clearing when you lose temporary hit points. So this was an issue where when you wild shape into an Owlbear, your rage could end early under some conditions. It wouldn't happen every time, but having fixed that makes that a much more reliable wild shape. Since that's the best wild shape for the mid-game, that's a very nice fix for any druid who's wild shaping. Gonna skim a couple of these. Fix the icy cloud formed via wall of ice, dealing 5d6 instead of 10d6. So that is an enormous upgrade to wall of ice. So here's how wall of ice works. You cast it and it deals 10d6 cold damage, and then when a segment breaks, it leaves behind a cloud that deals 10d6 cold damage. However, you can cast it and then immediately cancel your concentration on it, and it will deal the 10d6 for casting it, as well as give the enemy the dex save or fall prone, because it creates an ice surface under them as well, and then deal the damage that they would take from the cloud, and then at the start of their turn, because they're standing in the cloud, they take that cloud damage again. So previously, this was a total of 20d6, 10d6 when you cast, 5d6 when you cancel, and then 5d6 again at the start of their turn, which could all then be doubled with the wet condition because it's cold damage. Now it's a total of 30d6, which can be doubled to be effectively 60d6 of damage with one cast of Wall of Ice. So Wall of Ice is now probably the single best damaging spell in the game, fitting for a 6th level spell, but the trick with casting and then immediately canceling your concentration on it is going to do enormous amounts of damage to wet enemies. That's a huge upgrade to cold damage focused parties. So keep an eye out for Wall of Ice as a very, very powerful damaging spell. It's better than Chain Lightning, I think, now in terms of just raw damage for a 6th level spell. Fix the Slayer's default attack. That's a nice UI fix mostly. Updated Wild Strike so that it can work with the War Priest extra attack. Okay, so now you can be a War Priest to take one level of War Cleric and use your bonus action to do an additional attack with your wild shape forms. That's a pretty cool upgrade as well. Druids are often looking for a 1 or 2 level dip because you kind of get all the things you need from Druid with 10 levels of Druid when you max out your capstone abilities. So a 1 level dip in War Cleric for a couple extra attacks in wild shape form seems like a pretty powerful upgrade to me as well, and a great option. If that works. Cleric and Druid, of course, multi-class pretty well together because you get Sanctuary and whatever from Cleric, and heavy armor proficiency as well. So that's a pretty solid build, I think. Fierce Perilous Stakes can now only be targeted at allies, so that's fixing a bug which would let you make enemies vulnerable, I believe only on difficulties lower than Honor Mode, because on Honor Mode, Perilous Stakes only works... Perilous Stakes can't be cast on enemies anyways. Fix the Displace condition appearing on characters who didn't take falling damage. So this is, I think, with the Illithid Displace power, you could get displacement damage on anything that repositioned enemies. So the knockback Eldritch Blast Invocation, which I'm blanking on the name of, would deal the displace damage. If that's been fixed, that makes displace a lot weaker because you won't be getting just random damage on anything that's displacing, that's moving enemies, which will make displace a much less powerful passive ability. Let's see. Warden of Vitality can be cast with higher level spell slots. That was a bug. Teleport portion of Mobile Flourish can now be used on creatures killed with the initial attack. That's a pretty nice upgrade. Healing Vapors no longer immediately makes creatures wet in addition to creating a water surface. That's actually a very significant nerf to the Water Myrmidon. So Healing Vapors was the ability of the Water Myrmidon to summon a big cloud of water, like a 60-foot diameter cloud of water that would make everything wet and heal it every turn inside it. That was a great way to get an entire encounter wet, to then hit it with, for example, Wall of Ice or Chain Lightning to just blow things up. So the Water Myrmidon's ability to wet everything in a giant AoE was a big part of why you would summon a Water Myrmidon. This might make one of the other Myrmidons the default go-to summon, because without Healing Vapors getting everything wet, it's a lot less exciting. So that'll be interesting to test a little bit further, but that is a pretty significant nerf to one of the powerful strategies in Baldur's Gate, which was cast Healing Vapors and then blow everything up because it's now all wet and taking double damage from lightning. Freedom of movement now correctly preserves against Haunted Approach. This is a specific Act 3 encounter, so that's a nice usage for freedom of movement for Lady Janeth's estate. Tavern Brawler works with wild shapes in Honor Mode again. So what this means is that in patch 7, Tavern Brawler only gave you the attack bonus and not the damage bonus in Honor Mode. So it would double your strength bonus to hit, but not double your strength bonus to damage. Now that was still the most important part. The hit chance is the most important part of that feat, but this is still a significant upgrade to wild shaping druids and makes Tavern Brawler even better for them than it already was, and it was already really, really good. That druids are attacking at least 3 times a turn because they get improved wild strike for 3 extra attacks. And then of course you can use, any effects that give you more attacks. Like for example, now you can use War Cleric for an extra bonus action attack and get a 4th one. In Owlbear form, you'll have 22 strength when you're raging, or you can use a strength elixir to go up to even 27. So this can be a pretty significant amount of additional damage, but when you're adding your strength bonus to damage again on every single one of your attacks. This makes druids really solid sustained damage dealers even in the late game, just because you're adding another 20 or 30, potentially 40 damage per turn to a character that was already outputting very good damage. So Tavern Brawler, of course, is going to be mandatory for wild shaping druids. This is a significant buff to druid. Tiger's Bloodlust no longer targets items, so this could sometimes waste attacks, because it can only target up to 3 enemies. So if you were in an area with some dead bodies and enemies, it would sometimes waste attacks on the dead body before hitting the 3 enemies you wanted to hit. So Tiger Rage is a little better now. Specified more accurately, so clarified that only moon druids get magic attacks with their wild shapes. So some other druids were getting it by accident. Fixed a bug causing upcasted Grasping Vine to cost an action instead of a bonus action. That's nice, though. It's not like you were upcasting Grasping Vine that often. It is, I think it's a decent spell for a bonus action and a 4th level slot, but not one that's sort of really a go-to, and certainly not one you want to upcast that frequently. Couple bugs here and some other fixes to NPCs and stuff. Fix some of the creatures summoned at higher levels missing the hide action. This is nice. I believe the genie was unable to hide, which meant that if you summoned it, your party couldn't stealth. Now works against any melee attacks. Great. Fixed an infinite NPC spawn loop. Fixed area-based spells like Lightning Bolt and Sunbeam not working on the red caps in the Blushing Mermaid. I did not know that this was a bug, but great to have fixed that. Updated the wild shape rules for Myrmidons to merge the Myrmidons' proficiencies with the characters. This is another huge buff to druids. Druids previously were not proficient with martial weapons, and all the Myrmidon forms except Earth Myrmidon had martial weapons. So you would turn into a Myrmidon and not be proficient with your own weapon and lose miss your attacks a lot because you were not proficient with the weapon you were attacking with. So this is a huge upgrade to Moon Druids, especially ones that haven't multiclassed to gain martial weapon proficiency. Great fix as well, and again, just makes Druids even stronger at dealing damage. Glyph of Warding now works correctly with item effects. So I wasn't sure that this was not supposed to, or that this was supposed to work, but Glyph of Warding leaving damage on the ground and now working with giving you lightning charges, doing extra damage with Morning Frost, applying cold from the Winter's Clutches and other item effects. Presumably this will now work to apply Arcane Acuity as well. Glyph of Warding already a top tier spell, so this is a huge buff to this spell, which is going to make your spellcasting builds that are reliant on applying conditions with your items even stronger. Fix some issues with Uncanny Dodge. It will now trigger correctly. It will no longer trigger multiple times per round, and rogues can no longer somehow still use it, even if they're incapacitated. The Uncanny Dodge bugs, I haven't encountered a lot of them, but I've heard a lot of people mention these. I wonder if they had to do with console UIs in particular, because often when there's a bug that I haven't seen but other people have, it's because they're playing on console and I'm on PC. And so the UI is causing issues on console. So I don't know if that's true or not, but hopefully Uncanny Dodge should now be working correctly. Wildheart Rages now give bonus damage to offhand melee weapon attacks. So there were... and they now deal the improved damage past level 9. So great fix. Of course, there were a lot of missing damage buffs. I also wonder if the Giant's Rage bug has been fixed. So in the stress test, Path of the Giants lets you add your rage damage to thrown weapon attacks twice over. So it adds 4 damage to your thrown weapon attacks instead of 2, like you normally would for other barbarians. But when it was upgrading your rage at level 9, it stayed at 4 instead of going to 6, like you would expect. So I wonder if that's been fixed as well. We'll have to test that later on. Updated War Magic, this we already talked about, so you can use extra attack and war magic at the same time. And Shadowblade, granted by the Shadowblade ring, no longer requires concentration. So Shadowblade is a spell that now anybody can cast. It was just added as a spell in the game. Anybody who has it on their spell list can cast. It was added as a spell in the game and lets you summon a psychic damage short sword. There was a ring that previously let you do this, and when they added it in as a spell, the spell didn't require concentration, but the ring still did. So that's a great fix, and is going to make the Shadowblade ring a pretty powerful item for characters that want to use it. Having a non-concentration day-long pretty powerful weapon that you can summon and then double the damage with the resonant stone and stuff makes characters that can use that ability a huge threat in melee, and that's going to be part of some of the higher damaging builds in the future, especially for honor mode for things like Eldritch Knights or Arcane Trickster rogues. Overall, I think the big winner of the balance changes in this patch is Druids, especially Moon Druids, because Wild Shaping is just a much more consistent strategy for dealing damage now, especially in the late game, with Tavern Brawler applying to Wild Shape attacks, and with your proficiencies working correctly for Myrmidons. That's just going to be a huge bonus to your damage. Wall of Ice for wizards is now also an extremely powerful damaging option, and it gives wizards or characters using scrolls with Wall of Ice a super powerful damage boost. So it's a big boost to lightning and cold parties or sort of wet focused parties to be able to do even more damage and crowd control with Wall of Ice. So I think those are the most significant changes. Druids being the biggest winners out of this patch, but there's a lot of these fixes will also have a bunch of knock-on effects in sort of how you can build characters. And of course, everything is changing because they're adding new subclasses as well. Continuing on, they've also done a number of balancing updates to specific combat encounters. So let's take a quick look at those. Owlbear in the Papa Owlbear now gains Owlbear's Rage. Okay, so no longer important which order you kill those in. The Sosor Anti-Magic Field will now also prevent you from casting spells like Shield via reactions. This is actually interesting, not so much for this change, but Shield could be cast as a reaction while raging, even though you shouldn't be able to cast a spell while raging at all. So we'll have to test if that's still true, that you can cast shield while you're raging, even if they've fixed other cases where you could cast shield but shouldn't have been able to. Obviously, spoilers alert for all of the combat encounters mentioned in this section, of course. I'm just going to be skimming these to see if there's anything that's going to significantly change certain encounters. Let's see. Now, vulnerable to bludgeoning damage on the Shambling Mound. That's actually pretty nice. That gives you a much better option against a fairly difficult encounter. Fixed a bug related to fleeing from the combat with Ketheric. You now have to leave to successfully free. Okay. Yeah, so nothing here that's really jumping out in Act 2 as significant changes to specific combat encounters. Act 3, the Gate Masters will no longer bring reinforcements after the portals are closed. That's a nice one. There were infinite Githyanki, and that could be a problem. Orin's passive will no longer apply twice. That's a pretty big nerf to Orin, actually. Let's see. Continuing to skim all of these. Fixing Gortash's UI, actually, or AI. His AI was pretty bad, and he would use the wrong abilities a lot. So hopefully he will be a more challenging encounter in general if his AI has been fixed a little bit. And then overall gameplay. So this is mostly bug fixes, but again, we're just going to go through it and see if anything jumps out at us as being very significant to how the game is played in future. So a couple fixes to the way that certain actions work. Greater Invisibility's stealth checks now get progressively harder in honor mode. So is this in addition to the way they normally got progressively harder? So Greater Invisibility, you make a DC 15 stealth check the first time, then 17, 18, 19. I don't know why it skips 16 in order to keep attacking without revealing yourself. So if this is in addition to that, and it maybe scales up by +2 each time, it might make Greater Invisibility a less broken strategy. It'll still be a broken strategy that kind of removes all the game from the game, but that would be an interesting change to make that a less appealing way to kind of not engage with combat in Baldur's Gate 3. Let's see, some soft locks fixed. Gonna keep skimming here. The Everburn Blade will no longer consume weapon coatings that don't apply to it anyways. Okay, that's nice, so you don't waste your weapon coatings on the Everburn Blade now if you try to use them. You have to actually have a shovel in your inventory in order to dig. You can now dash with actions and bonus actions with Ranger's Companions. That's huge, actually. So they gain the ability to dash as a bonus action, but couldn't dash as an action afterwards. So now you can move your companions, your Beastmaster companions, so much faster, which is great if you need to. Fixed shield granted by the Amulet of the Harpers. So the Amulet of the Harper's Shield, I did not know that this didn't work on Magic Missile, because encountering Magic Missile cast by enemies was fairly rare, so this is a bug I wasn't aware of, but the Amulet of the Harpers is a pretty powerful item, giving shield to characters that normally don't have it, so a pretty nice fix for that, letting you use all of the effects of the shield spell with that item. Let's see. Prevented movement from being consumed when you enter turn-based mode on controller. Again, great for controller fixes. There are so many controller bugs, so really glad to see those. Fixed a bug where hurling a healing potion as a rogue in what is presumably an attempt to heal a target would trigger sneak attack. Yep. If you had sneak attack set to automatic, then you could sneak attack with your healing potions, which is kind of funny, but would kill your allies, which wasn't great. So great fix there. And the Gloves of Battle Mage's power now correctly grant Arcane Acuity. That is massive. So Arcane Acuity obviously is one of the most powerful things in Baldur's Gate 3. The Gloves of Battle Mage's power did not work at all, so having them actually do something means that that item is suddenly going to be an incredibly powerful item for spellcasters in general. Looking at specific things from each act, let's see. I don't see anything that is super significant to how you're going to play the game. Although making it so you can't help Ameluum investigate the parasite just by buying those items, it does actually mean you have to do that quest, which will change how people approach that one. You can't long rest. You won't be able to partially damage people and then long rest in the Moonrise Assault. So that was a way that a lot of players were cheesing the Moonrise Assault by doing some damage, running away, and then long resting, and they wouldn't have healed, making it so that you can't do that. It's still a powerful option to kill a few of them and then run away, but it is definitely no longer as powerful if you're not reducing their health, or if their health doesn't stay reduced. And let's see. Anything else that is super significant in terms of how you're going to approach specific encounters? Steel Watchers can no longer get drunk. Okay, well, that's unfortunate because we just added Drunken Master Monk, who relies on getting enemies drunk. I mean, it makes sense, obviously, they're robots, but still. The Drunken Master's power of partying should be enough to get Steel Watchers drunk. Why does Larian hate Drunken Masters so much? Mysteries for the ages. And nothing else significant there in terms of gameplay changes. And halfway through the patch notes, the remaining patch notes are mostly specific changes to scripting errors, writing errors, animations, cinematics, flow, and UI glitches and things like that. So rather than going through each of these individually because I respect your time, I'll show you sort of the sheer scope of the number of changes that they've made, and just say that there are a massive number of fixes to things that you would expect to work and now should work the way that you would expect. So a lot of changes, especially in Act 3. As you can see, a lot of scripting changes in Act 3 will make Act 3 a little smoother and remove some of the weirder edge cases where things wouldn't happen or people would have dialogue errors and things like that, where the journal would show things incorrectly. Tons of improvements to modding, tons of improvements to making mods, and a ton of improvement to performance as well. So obviously, when you're updating something like this, there's always the chance of introducing other errors, but it is my hope that given the sheer number of fixes that they have implemented, that the game will run much smoother for many, many people, including people who are experiencing crash errors or glitches, especially with dialogue or getting stuck in certain story events. Tooltip. Fix the incorrect damage amount in the tooltip for Artistry of War. That's pretty nice. So I will look at these tooltip updates just to see if there's anything. Paladin's Healing Radiance not showing the right calculations in character creation. That's great. Yeah, so a bunch of tooltip fixes even in character creation. So something that I have learned is that the UI and tooltips for the character creation menu and the in-game menu actually use a completely different system and are not related to one another. So if you're making like a custom class, you have to set both. So that's why you'll see these tooltip inaccuracies between the character creation menu and in-game, because they're actually built on two different architectures for reasons unknown, but probably having to do with technical debt from the original way that they coded it. So seeing these fixes and updates is definitely going to make things smoother. A ton more fixes to level design and removing unreachable things and things like that is all great. Animation and clipping fixes, again, excellent. So you can see there's just so many fixes to various bugs that were appearing. So hopefully the game will be smoother and more stable and have the writing make a little bit more sense for everyone. So really excited to just see all of these fixes to alignments and animations and scripting and everything. But of course, we don't have to go through each of them individually. All right, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the patch notes for patch 8 of Baldur's Gate 3. I will be doing some testing offline to see if anything has significantly changed since the last stress test mini update in terms of the new subclasses. And if so, I will do a follow-up video talking about all the changes so that those of you who were following the development during the stress test can know what's different since the last time we went over all the subclasses. If you don't see that video shortly, then you can assume that my last review of all the subclasses is still basically accurate, and definitely go check that out because we talked about what all their abilities are in quite a bit of detail and sort of how to think about building them. And of course, we'll be doing more specific guides for each of the subclasses in future as I do guides to each of the 12 new subclasses and all of the new awesome builds that were enabled by the new spells and abilities that were added to the game. I think overall, other than the community, who are really the big winners here, getting so much content for free, modding updates and everything, which is just amazing. Again, I want to reiterate how cool it is that we're getting so much stuff completely for free years after the launch of the game. I think the big winners were druids here, with a massive update to their combat effectiveness, especially moon druids, who can now use their myrmidon forms more effectively. Clerics, because the new cantrips make every cleric better. Clerics kind of lacked early game damage, so adding Toll the Dead has really changed the way that clerics play out in the early game, making them super powerful in honor mode parties, which of course they already were, but now they're even smoother for every honor mode party. And of course, characters that want to use Shadowblade, because now that's possible. That's a whole category of character that didn't exist previously. And characters that want to attack using their spellcasting modifier, because Hexblade now exists and can let you do that with only a 1-level dip. So there's tons of new builds possible, but the biggest winners in terms of the balance updates from this patch are druids and clerics, which were already very powerful characters and just got even more tools. As always, my friends, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. It helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And you can subscribe to my channel for more build guides for the new Patch 8 subclasses and other Baldur's Gate 3 builds, and of course other strategy game analysis as well. Cheers, my friends, and I will catch you next time.